Welcome to Liars and Lovers, the podcast where love, deception, relationships, and crime collide. I'm your host, Lisa Ribacoff. Every relationship has a story. Sometimes that story is beautiful. Sometimes it's complicated. And sometimes beneath the promises, those declarations of love, and the happily ever after lies something much darker. A lie, a secret, a betrayal, a manipulation, and sometimes a crime. Welcome to the very first episode of Liars and Lovers. I'm so excited that you're here. This podcast has been a long time coming, and I wanted this first episode to be an introduction, not just to the podcast, but the conversations we're going to have together. Because at the heart of Liars and Lovers is truly one question: how well do we really know the people that we love? Relationships are complicated. We meet someone, we connect with them, we trust them, we share our lives with them, our homes, our families, our finances, our secrets. And sometimes we share everything with another person, only to discover that the person that we thought we knew was not who we believed them to be. And that raises some fascinating questions. Why do people lie? Why do we sometimes ignore red flags? Why do people stay in relationships that are unhealthy or dangerous? How do manipulators gain trust? How do investigators uncover deception? And what happens when a relationship moves from emotional betrayal into criminal behavior? These are the questions we're going to explore here. This is not just a true crime podcast, and it's not just a relationship podcast. It's a podcast about the intersection of human behavior, psychology, deception, investigation, and crime. Because sometimes the person closest to the victim is the person who knows the most. And sometimes the person closest to the victim is the person who has the most to hide. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lisa Ribacoff. My professional background has given me a unique perspective on people, behavior, investigations, and deception. I've worked as a polygraph examiner, investigator, instructor, and subject matter expert. I've worked with law enforcement, private investigators, attorneys, the media, and individuals dealing with some of the most difficult and complicated situations imaginable. I've also spent years working in media and behind the scenes on cases and stories involving people who are often dealing with the most emotional moments of their lives. And one thing I've learned over and over again is this: people are complicated. Human behavior is complicated. And the truth is rarely as simple as a headline. A person can be charming and deceptive, loving yet manipulative, a victim, and in some other cases, also an offender. A person can lie about one thing and tell the truth about another. And sometimes the truth is hidden in the space between what someone says and what they do. That is where things do get interesting. But what does it mean to be a liar? Let's start with the obvious question. Is it someone who tells one lie, or is it someone who tells multiple lies? Is it someone who constantly manipulates other people? Or is it someone who hides a secret? Or is it something more complicated than that? Because the truth is, most people lie. We lie about small things. We lie to avoid hurting someone's feelings. We lie to avoid consequences. We lie because we're embarrassed. We lie because we're afraid. And we lie sometimes because we want something. People lie because the truth would destroy the life that they've created. But not all lies are equal. There's a very big difference between telling someone that their haircut looks really nice when you don't really like it, and creating an entire false identity to manipulate someone. There's a difference between hiding a surprise birthday party and hiding a second relationship. There's a difference between a lie told out of fear and a lie used as a weapon. And throughout this podcast, we're going to explore those differences. We're going to talk about deception, but we're also going to talk about the psychology behind it. What motivates someone to lie? What do they gain? What are they afraid of losing? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when someone believes the lie that they're told? Now, let's talk about the other half of the title of our podcast, The Lovers. Because love can be one of the most powerful forces in the world. Love can make us feel safe. It can make us feel seen. It can make us vulnerable. And it can sometimes make us ignore the things that we would immediately recognize in someone else. Think about that. If your best friend told you that their partner had lied to them repeatedly and manipulated them, isolated them, or betrayed their trust, what would you say? You might say, leave, run, you deserve better. That's a huge red flag. But when it's happening to us, things can feel very different because we're not looking at the situation from the outside. We're emotionally invested. We remember the good times. We remember the person that we fell in love with. We remember the promises. And sometimes we don't want to believe that the person that we love could be capable of hurting us. It doesn't make someone weak. It makes them human. And that's an important distinction. One of the things that I want to do on this podcast is talk about these situations without judgment. Because it's easy to look at a case after everything that has happened and say, I would have known. I would have seen the red flags. I would never fall for that. But the reality is, we don't always know how we will react until we are in that situation. Manipulation doesn't always look like manipulation in the beginning. Sometimes it looks like attention. Sometimes it looks like love bombing. Sometimes it looks like someone finally understands you. And that's what makes some forms of deception so powerful. One of the things we'll talk about frequently on Liars and Lovers are red flags. Now, a red flag doesn't automatically mean that someone's a criminal. A red flag doesn't mean that someone is guilty. And a red flag does not mean a relationship is doomed. But red flags can be information. They can be patterns. They can be behaviors that make us pause and question what exactly is going on. Does someone constantly change their story? Do their words and actions consistently contradict each other? Do they isolate you from friends and family? Do they become controlling? Do they make you question your own memory? Do they refuse to take responsibility? Do they create constant chaos and then blame everybody else for it? And again, one behavior by itself does not tell us everything, but patterns do matter. In investigations, we look at patterns. In psychology, we look at patterns. And in relationships, patterns can tell us a lot. There are relationships that end badly. There are relationships that become toxic. And then there are relationships that do become dangerous. Sometimes the warning signs are visible, sometimes they're not. Sometimes the people around the victim saw something was wrong, and sometimes no one knew. In future episodes, we'll talk about cases involving romance scams, infidelity, murder, domestic violence, financial crimes, obsessive behaviors, manipulation, false identities, missing persons, and relationships that became the center of a criminal investigation. We'll hear from experts who have been there: detectives, forensic psychologists, prosecutors, attorneys, other polygraph examiners, journalists, and people who have experienced these situations firsthand. And the goal is not simply to ask who is lying. The goal is to ask why. What was the motive? What was the opportunity? What was the relationship like? Was anything hidden? And how did investigators uncover the truth? As we move forward with this podcast, I want you to listen for the questions. When we discuss a case, I don't want us to rush to conclusions. I want us to ask, what do we know? What do we think we know? What is confirmed? What is alleged? What is missing? What does the timeline tell us? What does the relationship tell us? What do the actions tell us? And perhaps most importantly, what would change our understanding of the situation? Because that's often a question that we don't ask enough. What information would cause us to change our minds? If we believe someone is innocent, what evidence would make us reconsider? If we believe someone's guilty, what information would make us question that conclusion? Being willing to change our minds when new information becomes available is not a weakness. It's critical thinking. And investigations, that is extremely important. Deception is often at the center of criminal investigations. A suspect may lie to law enforcement. A witness may lie to protect someone. A partner may lie about where they were. A person may create an alibi, and someone may hide evidence. But sometimes the person who appears the most emotional is telling the truth. And sometimes the person who appears calm is actually telling the truth. Someone who's nervous may simply just be nervous. And that this is something I want to emphasize from the very beginning. There's no single behavior that proves that someone's lying. Not eye contact, not looking away, not fidgeting, not crying, not being calm, not being emotional. Human behavior is not a lie detector. And one of the things that we'll do on this podcast is separate fact from fiction. We'll talk about what behavior can tell us, and we'll talk about what behavior cannot tell us. There's another kind of deception that I think is important to talk about, and that's the stories that we tell ourselves. Because sometimes the person lying to us isn't another person. Sometimes it's us. Now, I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean that we're all capable of creating a version of reality that makes something easier to accept. We'll tell ourselves, they're just having a bad day. They didn't really mean that. Or things will get better. They love me. They would never do that. And sometimes those things are true. Sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes relationships go through difficult periods. Sometimes people change. But sometimes those explanations become a way of avoiding what we already knew. And that can be incredibly difficult because recognizing the truth often means accepting the fact that we have to make a decision, that we have to leave, that we have to confront someone, we have to report something. We have to admit that the relationship we thought we had was not the relationship we were actually in. And that can be terrifying. So sometimes the mind protects us. We focus on the good memories and we remember the apologies. We remember the promises. We convince ourselves that the behavior was an exception, and maybe it was. But what happens when the exception becomes a pattern? That's when we have to start asking different questions. Not just, hey, do they love me? But do I feel safe? Do I feel respected? Do their actions match their words? Do I feel like I can trust what I'm being told? Because love is important, but love should not require us to ignore reality. On Liars and Lovers, we're going to explore the science, psychology, and investigative techniques used to understand deception. But this podcast is not going to just focus on the facts. Because behind every case are people, victims, families, friends, investigators, and sometimes the people accused of committing the crime. True crime can be fascinating, but these are real people, real lives, real families, and real consequences. So as we explore these stories, I want to approach them with curiosity, but also with compassion. We can ask difficult questions without losing sight of the people involved. We can examine behavior without diagnosing people from a distance. We can discuss evidence without pretending that we know more than the facts allow us to know. And we can be fascinated by a case, but still remembering that someone's tragedy is not entertainment. That balance is extremely important to me. So, what can you expect from Liars and Lovers? Each episode will be a little different. Some episodes will focus on a specific case. Some will feature expert interviews. Some will focus on psychology and human behavior. And some will explore investigative techniques. And some may focus on the questions that don't always get asked. Why did the relationship begin? When did things change? Were there warning signs? Was the deception intentional? How did the people around them know? And how did investigators begin to separate the truth from the lies? But I also want this to be an interactive podcast. I want to hear from you. I want to know what cases you want to discuss, what questions you have, what behaviors you want to understand, and what stories you think deserve a closer look. Because every case is more than one perspective, and sometimes asking the right question is where the truth begins. I also want to be honest with you about my perspective. I've spent much of my career working with people in situations where the truth does matter. That means I've learned to listen carefully, to observe, to ask questions, and to recognize that people rarely tell their stories in a perfectly neat and organized way. People leave things out. They remember things differently. They become emotional. They get defensive. They contradict themselves. And sometimes those contradictions matter, but sometimes they don't. That is why context is so important. A single statement rarely tells the entire story. A single behavior rarely tells the entire story. A single piece of evidence rarely tells the entire story. The truth is often found by looking at everything together. The words, the behavior, the timeline, the evidence, the relationships, and the circumstances. That is what we will do here. At the end of the day, I think most of us have something in common. We want to know the truth. We want to know what really happened. We want answers. We want explanations. We want to understand how something went wrong. And sometimes we want to know whether the warning signs were there all along. But the truth is not always satisfying. Sometimes the truth is complicated. Sometimes there are no perfect answers. Sometimes the person we thought was the villain was also a victim in another part of their life. Sometimes someone who appeared to be a victim was hiding something. Sometimes the evidence does not tell us everything we want to know. And sometimes the most honest answer is, we don't know. And I think that's okay. Because the goal of this podcast is not to pretend to solve every mystery in 45 minutes. The goal is to ask thoughtful questions, to examine the information, to hear from people with experience, and to better understand the complicated behavior that makes us all human. I want Liars and Lovers to feel like a conversation. I want you to listen and think, wait, I never thought about it that way. Or, that behavior sounds familiar. Or, I've experienced something similar. Or even, I disagree. That's okay. I don't expect everyone to have the same opinion. In fact, I think the best conversations often happen when people ask questions and challenge assumptions, of course, respectfully. So as you listen, I encourage you to think critically. Don't automatically believe everything you hear, but also don't automatically dismiss everything you hear. Ask yourself, what is the source? What is the evidence? What is the context? And what might we be missing? Because sometimes the most important clue is the one that we haven't found yet. So let me leave you with a question. Have you ever looked back on a relationship and thought, how did I not see that? Maybe it was a friend, a partner, someone you worked with. Maybe it was someone you trusted. And then one day, something changed. You discovered a secret. You learned the truth. Or you realized that the person you thought you knew was not the person you believed them to be. That experience can change the way that we see people. It can change the way that we trust someone. It can change the way that we love someone. And it can also change the way that we listen. Because sometimes the truth is right in front of us, but we don't see it. Not because we're stupid, not because we're naive, but because we want to believe the person we love. And sometimes the person who is lying knows exactly how to make us believe. I want you to remember something else. Every relationship has a story, but the story we hear is not always the whole story. Sometimes there are missing chapters, hidden characters. Sometimes there are secrets buried beneath the surface. And sometimes the truth is hiding in details. A text message, a timeline, a contradiction, a financial transaction, a conversation, a behavior that seems so insignificant at the time. The truth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it leaves clues, and our job is to pay attention. This is what Liars and Lovers is going to be about. The stories we tell, the secrets we keep, the people we trust, the warning signs we sometimes miss, and the questions that can help us better understand what really happened. So, welcome to Liars and Lovers. Thank you for being here from the very beginning. I'm so excited to take this journey with you. In future episodes, we'll talk about real cases, real relationships, real investigations, and real people. And sometimes we'll simply be reminded that the truth is rarely as simple as the story we first hear. We're going to hear from the experts who can help us understand the psychology and the behavior behind the stories. And we'll hopefully learn something along the way. Maybe we'll learn to recognize a red flag. Maybe we'll learn to ask better questions. Maybe we'll understand why people behave the way that they do. And maybe, sometimes, we'll simply be reminded that the truth is rarely as simple as the story that we do hear. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. Follow us along on social media. Send me your questions, your case suggestions, and the stories that you want to explore. Because every relationship has a story. Every investigation has questions. And every lie leaves a clue. Until next time, trust your instincts. Question the story. And remember, in the world of liars and lovers, the truth always leaves a clue. I'm Lisa Ribacoff. Thank you for listening.